From FS Securities. Every morning, every Monday morning, I go through what happened globally around the world the previous weeks and try to see from the information, the technical and fundamental that we have from previous weeks, what we may predict what could happen this coming weeks. I show you how investors and traders may have made money on our stock market. I show you what was hot and what was not, and what you should have held and what you should have actually folded. So enjoy the presentation and please give us some feedback if you have any. We would really always appreciate to hear from people that we can communicate with. Well, from around the globe, we start with what happened on Saturday morning. This is actually the final figures, and on the left hand side we've got the figures from the day before. So we've had two positive days for the Dow, the S&P 500 and the Nasdaq. And also in Europe, the StoxX 50 index, which comprises most major European markets, was up 2 days in a row. And in London, the FTSE was also very positive. And the same thing with Germany, the DAX. I guess what you can say is that there were some rumors that maybe they found a cure, early stage cure for the virus, for the coronavirus. So that created some positive momentum in the global markets. And in Japan, we had a good day on Friday, but not so good on Thursday. And in China, the Shanghai index was up 2 days in a row. Our market was down 50 days on Friday, but recovered all the losses on Friday and went up even higher with 71 points higher on Saturday. And by the way, the futures indicate that this morning when the market opens, it most likely the market will open flat. Gold, by the way, was down 2 days in a row. On Saturday morning, we've seen gold below 1700 for the first time in several days. And silver was down also 2%. Copper was up. And by the way, West Texas crude oil, that's the one we try to trade on and we have open position in CFDs, was down 8%. We've gone bullish when the market was below $17. We expected that was the bottom. So let's see what happens this week. If the market goes well above $18 US per barrel, we're going to make money for sure. And by the way, if you want to trade any of those commodities, all you have to do is talk to us. We always focus on the soybeans because apparently, according to President Trump, China is buying soybeans from America and paying the tariff, and $250 million is going to go to the farmers. Well, you ask the question why the price went down 2 days in a row for the soybeans. If it were talking about supply and demand, well, I want to know why it dropped. Now, in terms of the US dollar, was down on Saturday morning, and our Australian dollar went even higher. You can see we've had 2 positive days for the Australian dollar against the US, and the same thing against the other currencies. Okay, now let's have a look at the chart for the Dow. This is the weekly chart and this is the daily chart. You can see we've had a good momentum from out of 3 weeks out of 4. We've had green candles, mean positive positive weeks. And you can see here on the daily, most of the days were up, and we finish on the highest point in 5 weeks. So I think if you can see also here, this is the Fibonacci. That was the highest point many weeks ago. That's the highest point. We've seen nearly 30,000, just below the 30,000, and we've gone down to almost 18,000 points for the Dow. And guess what? We've recovered more than 50% of that drop. How is going to that give us indication? Well, according to Gann, 50% retracement is very positive. By the way, if you look at the 50% Gann criteria, we can also look at the 61.8 Fibonacci criteria, and if it goes above 50 and goes up, we may expect some kind of resistance around the 61.8% of the drop from the highest to the very lowest. So that's interesting time. Now in terms of the daily, I want to really focus on the orange, which is the 50-day moving average, the pink is the 100, and the black is the 200. Usually when the market is very positive, the black is below the other two long-term moving averages, and guess what happens here? We've seen the orange dropping below the pink, and then the pink dropping below the black. That is actually very positive long term. So until we see a major retracement or inversion, the market long term is bearish, even though we've seen 50% recovery. Now in the short term, I want to really tell you that that black dotted line, different from the top one, that is actually the 21-day moving average. And you can see here, after several days, the orange, which is the 9-day moving average, has crossed over the 21. So the short term, we are bullish on the crossover between the 9 and the 21. And by the way, if you look at the leading indicator of the parabolic stop and reverse, we've gone positive quite some time ago. So you have to look at all the indicators. And the stochastic also turned positive some time ago with the major only one drop below the red line, which is actually is the signal. As long as the blue is above the red, that is actually positive, and above that line, the 80%, I don't care where the blue line in relation to the red line, anything above that line we are positive. The short term, we are bullish on the Dow. Long term, we are bearish. Now, we also like to look at what happened over the last 2 weeks. In here, these two columns here tells you what happens in number of points and number of percentage over last week. And we like to put 2 weeks together to be able to see how the trend is forming over 2 weeks rather than just 1 week. And here you can see the Dow was up 2% last week. But look, the week before was even more positive. 2 weeks in a row, we've had 15%, which means 13% 2 weeks ago and 2% last week. You know, that gives you the 15%. And also you can see the Nasdaq and the S&P 500. We've had 2 weeks ago, we've had a tremendous week. So even though they say that last week we had some positive momentum because of the rumor about the vaccine, well, what about the week before? Well, the week before, I think the President of the United States, Donald Trump, my mate, not really, predicted that the opening of the economy is going to really start to happen well before the end of the month. So we'll see what happens. The US dollar went down over 2 weeks despite being flat last week. And the Australian dollar, as I mentioned, we had very good 2 weeks. With 2 weeks ago, the major inclination. In terms of gold 2 weeks ago was positive. Last week was negative. 2 weeks together, we're still positive. So it tells you that even though the market dropped below 1700, we were well above 1700 3 weeks ago. Silver also 2 weeks ago was very positive. And despite the decline last week, we've had positive fortnights. Crude oil, look what happened to crude oil. When we expected that the deal that Trump alleged to have made between himself and Saudi Arabia and Mexico and Russia, you know, created some, you know, the bottom of the gold of the price of oil. Well, guess what happened? After the deal that he claims he's made, the price of oil went even down further. At one stage it was below $17 US per barrel from where it was 22 when he started to claim that he made the deal of the century. Okay, what a bullshit asset he is. Okay, natural gas was up, and okay, now what we've got here, the wheat down, corn down, soybean down. Alright, now if you want information about the other commodities, all you have to do is talk to us. And by the way, iron ore, if you follow iron ore, which is important for BHP and Rio, was up 1% to $85.60 US per ton over the week. Now we have a mechanical system based on indicators on 2 time frames. For the investor, we look at the monthly and the weekly. For the conservative trader, we look at the weekly and the daily. And for the very aggressive trader, we look at much shorter terms. So we have different strategies for different time frames, which really reflect the risk aversion or risk taking by the various people who trade and invest. So if you're an investor, a long-term investor, these are the criteria for you. We see the Dow was for the long term is neutral, but for the very aggressive it is bullish. So if you're a short-term trader, there we are, here we are for you. That is actually what happened on Saturday morning, and that is the Saturday before, and that is actually 3 Saturdays ago. And on the right hand side we see the daily. That is for Saturday morning, Friday morning and Thursday morning. And you can see that if you rely on what we predicted 2 Saturdays ago, not last Saturday but the Saturday before, and we traded during the week, well, of course you would have done reasonably well trading the Dow. And for gold, again, we were bullish. However, even though the market dropped on Saturday morning, we're still bullish for gold, because remember, our criteria here is based on 5 indicators out of 8 on 2 time frames. And some of the indicators are lagging indicators. They may take a day or 2 or 3. So we're not going to turn neutral until the daily charts move. And the daily charts, of course, will depend what happens today. And then tomorrow morning we might see. So even though we've got one signal coming out, sometimes it's better to wait for 2 days in a row before we take some action. But crude oil, we were bearish 2 Saturdays ago, and right through the week we were very bearish, so you've done well on Santos and Woodside Petroleum. Okay, on soybeans, bearish. On the Australian dollar, on Saturday, 2 Saturdays ago, we said for the very aggressive we were bullish, and again you can see on Wednesday, sorry, that's actually Thursday, Friday and Saturday, we continue to be bullish. Again, just to tell you that we've got some mechanical system that helps us to determine which way we go based on some technical indicators. Of course, nothing is guaranteed. You need to remember that. Of course, there are many fundamental variables can change from one day to another. Just take, for instance, if Donald Trump gets out on TV and says something, of course that the market will listen to it and may affect the price of any commodities or any index. Now the Australian dollar, we follow the market in America most of the time, and you can see here out of 3 weeks we had very positive 3 weeks, and again that's reflected by what we can see here. The only difference between the American market recovered 50%. Our Australian market recovered about 36%. Now, if we have to rely on the 50% gain, we expect the market has to go slightly below 5,800. Well, the market at the moment is sitting around 5,465, quite a bit distance to go before it gets to 5,800. So, but anyway, you can see here that you traded banks or whatever. We had some really reasonable 2 weeks in a row. Our mechanical system, again, the ASX 200, that's our leading index, was up 2% last week, but 2 weeks in a row we were actually up 8.2%. So that means about nearly 6% 2 weeks ago and nearly 2% last week. Our market gauge, ASX 200, is made up to a certain extent by two major sectors, the financial and the materials. When both sectors are up considerably, the market somehow is dragged that same direction. And when the these two sectors drop considerably, major extent, then usually the market is dragged down the same way. Well, the financials, we're almost flat last week, but we're actually up 5% 2 weeks in a row. And the materials, which of course is made up to a great extent by BHP, Rio, Fortescue, the iron ore mining companies, was up 2% last week, and overall 7.6% in 2 weeks. So 2 good weeks for the iron ore, and that's the material sector, and the financials, and of course the market followed suit and dragged the other sectors with it. Now if you go down this column here and see which sector performed the best, well, gold performed the best last week. That's the gold sector, 8.5%, 17% over 2 weeks. And consumer discretionary, like the Harvey Norman, interesting enough, Harvey Norman JB Hi-Fi was up 12% over 2 weeks. Let's have a look at the banks, the financial. We mentioned the financial. Going down further, information technology was up nearly 7%, industrial 6%, and consumer staples, that's the Woolworths of this world, Coles, 5.2% last week. Now looking at the major stocks, now the worst company over 2 weeks was Bramble, down 15%. It's the only one amongst the stock companies that went down by 14%. AMP had very good 2 weeks, up nearly 21%. And also if you go down this column over 2 weeks, we've had Macquarie Bank nearly up 19%. Newcrest Mines, thanks to gold, was up 16.5%. And then you've got Wesfarmers, 10%, and Worley Parson, 11%. Woodside Petroleum, interestingly enough, even though oil was down, looking at the energy here, the energy was down last week, but was up 2 weeks in a row. So that's probably what happened. Woodside Petroleum was down last week, but over the last 2 weeks was up by 7%. Santos, down last week, however 2 weeks in a row, together up 7.5%. So the sector is important. We look at the sector, and then inside the sector we see the companies. Okay, we like to look at volume as well to see how strong the market is. Look here how good the last 10 days or 7 days we had mainly advances above the declines. So really the market started to recover 7 days. And volume, I mean, there is no point the advances being higher than the declines if the volume is dropping. But it's very positive when we see the volume is going up and the advances are above the declines. And advances over decline over the last 3 weeks obviously have been very, very positive. This is weekly advances over declines. These are daily, and this is actually daily volume. Again, if you want a copy of the chart, we'll have it to give to you. Now looking at the sectors, this is actually last Saturday, not the most recent Saturday, but the Saturday before, and that's where I circled it. And then if you followed what we presented on Monday morning last week, and traded accordingly. That's what you would have done according to the various daily sector movement. So you can see here, with the exception of energy, we started on this is Wednesday, that's Thursday, Friday and Saturday. So on Thursday morning, energy was still up. It was only on Friday that it started, the lagging indicators started to change and we went neutral. But we've been bearish for the long-term investor for energy. And when we talk about energy, we talk about Santos and Woodside Petroleum. And then on Saturday morning, we turned very bearish across everybody. So that's for the trend on Monday morning today. And in terms of the others, again, financials, we were actually very strong on Thursday, but on Friday morning we turned neutral. It's like, a small change in the signal, and then we continue to be neutral for the very aggressive on financial on Monday morning. This is actually done on Saturday, but it reflects what we are likely to do on Monday morning. Now all the others are bullish with the exception of telecommunication. We were actually neutral, but somehow despite the neutral, we were actually starting to be bullish on Thursday morning, but then we vacillate between bullish, neutral, neutral. So again, telecommunication can be a bit risky at the moment. Now on Friday, these are the companies that were the most active in terms of percentage. Stockland, Sydney Airport, 8%. Transurban, 7%. Qantas had a good day on Friday. Afterpay had Afterpay went up tremendously over the last 2 weeks, recovered quite a lot. Afterpay up 6% on Friday. Aristocrat, Ramsay, Rio, Allsearch, and so on and so on and so on. And if you want a copy of this slide, all you have to do is talk to us. Now, I mentioned before, we also look at volume. We scan the market for extraordinary volume. So we start with the top 50. If the volume last week exceeds the average volume over 50 weeks, then obviously we have an interest in this particular company. Well, nothing appeared for the top 50, either up or down. You see, this is actually top 50 bullish and top 50 bearish. On the mid cap, Bellevue Gold, the price went up 7% last week, and the volume over 50 weeks was approximately 5.9 million transactions. Well, last week we've seen 14.5, but then don't forget that the gold sector was up last week and the week before. So we've had good there. So it's worthwhile looking at this Bellevue Gold and see whether it's really worthwhile trading it. On the downside, Webjet dropped 11% or 12% and had 600% over the weekly volume. The volume over 50 week, the average over 50 week was 6.5 million transaction. Well, last week we've seen nearly 47 million. Is it worthwhile looking at Webjet? Again, depends whether we can trade CFDs or options on Webjet. Company called Dacian Gold. When gold went up, this company went down 56% of its price and had 400% of the average weekly volume. Worthwhile looking at. Now on the daily volume, we see that Ramsay had nearly 5% increase in the price last week, with 17% just slightly increase in the volume. Nothing on the bearish side. Now on the mid cap, on the daily, this is actually Friday price change and volume. Well, Regis Healthcare, interesting. Ramsay Healthcare was up, Regis Healthcare was down. Up 10% in the price. No, sorry, Regis was also up, sorry, excuse me, and had 132, nearly double the volume. So the healthcare sector must have been very, very positive. West Africa Resources, 6% up in price and nearly double the volume. That's the daily volume. And you can go right through the companies. LSA's gold was up. So Ramelius Resources. So most of these mining companies had a good week. Main Pharma, we started to trade Main Pharma, went up 10% on Friday, and the volume was nearly double. So actually that's the reason why we traded Main Pharma, and we're making small profit on Main Pharma at the moment. Okay, now in terms of disclosure, everything we said today is actually of general advice only. Nothing is for personal advice. There is no guarantee that everything we say here will guarantee you profit. So before you take any action, please consult with us or with your professional advisor. And remember, if you have any questions, all you have to do is ask. How to ask? Well, if you want to talk to me personally, you can write to me at george@fs, that's FS for full service, fssecurities.com.au, george@fssecurities.com.au. And if you're ringing from overseas, 61 is for the country code. You don't need the 0 because this is the mobile number. 61 411 259526. Locally, you ring 0411 259526. And all I can say to you guys, have a good week and happy trading.